Before we conclude tonight, we want to thank Lizzie Tribble for again joining us tonight as our timekeeper. So without any further ado, let's begin. We'll begin tonight with you, Mr. Diamondstone. If you had 60 seconds with me in an elevator and had to describe yourself, what would you say?
I probably wouldn't say anything, but let me try. I'm almost 78 years old, been a candidate a number of times, represent a party that stands for peace and individual liberty and social justice, and I'm a member of the Socialist Party, the American Legion, Veterans for Peace, and Liberty Union. I'm an officer of Liberty Union. I live with my spouse of 55 years. I have 4 children, Aaron, Jesse, Paula, Ian, and 15 grandchildren, and they all live within area code 05301, except for one who is about 17 miles away, so my whole social life revolves around them.
Cris Ericson.
Hi, we're all products of our families, and we have 2 branches on our family's trees, our mother's side, our father's side. And today I wore some family heirlooms. These are Native American Indian heads, and also in my earrings, to remind me to tell you tonight that we have to take care of Mother Earth. My great-great-great-great-great-grandfather on one family line was Uwano, the leader of the Piscatawny tribe of a branch of Virginian Algonquin. And so it's really important to me. I was always raised to know that I was the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of this tribal chieftain, and that it's so important to take care of Mother Earth. And that's why I'm here today to tell you we've got to stop the F-35s, we've got to protect Lake Champlain, and we need to make hemp and marijuana legal under federal law. Thank you.
Laurel LaFramboise.
Well, 2.5 years ago, I started researching who to vote for in the 2010 elections, and I came across a chart that basically said it hasn't mattered for the last 35 years what party was in power, the national debt has increased. And since that was my biggest issue, I decided to try and figure out a way to solve that problem. And I came up with a solution so simple, I called it VOTE, to keep it short and simple, VoteKISS. And basically it's just changing the order in which a bill becomes a law, that we first write short and simple bills that solve our biggest problems in ways that everyone can understand and most people can agree with. And then we vote for someone who signs a contract to only vote for those bills as written. That takes the politics out of the position of representative. And that's what I decided to do, to run for office so that I could get this thing out in the open.
Thank you. Just to remind you, Mr. MacGovern, my question was if you had 60 seconds with me in an elevator, how would you describe yourself?
I was raised on a New England dairy farm. I went to Dartmouth College, majored in Chinese language and culture. I served a few terms in the legislature in Massachusetts. I went into business for a while, helping American companies in Southeast Asia and China, and moved up to Vermont in the late 90s. Been active on my town development review board, the budget committee. I'm running because I care deeply about the future of this country, and the big issue for me is also the debt, and the debt we're leaving to our children and our grandchildren, and the dysfunction in Washington, that in order to resolve that, we need to vote for change.
Mr. Moss.
My name is Peter Moss, and I live in Fairfax, Vermont, and I am a licensed professional engineer, licensed in Vermont and in New York. I am running for legislative office, namely for the United States Senate, because the job of legislators is to legislate, not create jobs or change the economic situation, but pass laws that will do that. Other details about me are kind of lengthy. I have a list of 10 bills I will introduce, and if I am not elected, I will champion those bills as a citizen. And since there are 10 of them, I call it the Moss Sawbuck, which is the symbol for 10 items, and I hope we can get to that later.
Mr. Sanders.
Mark, I live in Burlington. My wife, Jane, and I have been married for almost 25 years. We have 4 kids and 7 grandchildren who are the loves of our life. I was elected as the first independent in 1981 in Burlington's history and served as mayor for 8 years, and very proud of the role that we played there in making Burlington one of the most livable small cities in America. I was elected to the House of Representatives as the first independent in 40 years, elected 6 years ago to the United States Senate. And I want to thank the people of Vermont for the honor of allowing me to be the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. My main concern is the decline of the middle class, very high levels of poverty, and the growing gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else.
You can also join us tonight online at vpt.org. We do have a live chat that's going on as we speak. My next question will start with you, Cris Ericson. Some of you have already addressed this in your opening, but your top issue, and please name 1 and not 5 issues. Cris?
All right, my top issue is that there's all this controversy about whether or not Israel is going to go to war with Iran. And when President Obama spoke about the big yellow bird, I don't think he was talking about the big yellow bird. I think he was talking, you know, Big Bird on TV. I think he was talking about China. China, Chinese people, Oriental people are referred to as yellow. China has the largest population on earth, 1 billion people. They have so many people that they force women to have abortions. They have no respect for human life at all. And China is friends with Iran. China is trading partners with Iran. If we help Israel go to war with Iran, then we're going to have to deal with an angry China. And I think that's a really big problem, and we have to just put a stop to it and negotiate peace.
Well, as I said in the opening statement, that I really feel that our biggest problem is the deficit, but I believe that the reason why we haven't been able to lower the national debt is because our political system is broken, and we need to fix it, or this will continue whether we have a Republican or a Democrat in the presidency or in the majority of Congress. And the way VoteKISS fixes it is by a constitutional amendment with those 10 major changes.
Well, for me, very clearly, it's the issue of the debt and the deficit. $16 trillion national debt. We take in $3 trillion a year and spend $4. Some years we've actually had a $1.8 trillion debt in 1 year. And getting a handle on that. It is, we're heading toward disaster, and if we continue down that road, America will be incapable of being a leader in the world and being able to have a prosperous life for our people, the citizens of this country. And second would be to get the economy going again. 23 million people out of work, looking for work, 1-point-something% growth per year. That is the way. We got to get the economy going again. People are creating jobs. That too will help sort the debt problem.
Moss?
My top issue is a single term of office term limit, because what we have now is a group of professional career politicians who run for re-election, often for life. And this helps the real decision makers, who are the Bohemian Club, who meet once a year in July in California. They make the decisions. The politics you see on the media, which the Bohemians own and manipulate, are a make-believe of two parties, which are really one party with a donkey face and an elephant face. And I am running to reveal the truth about all these machinations so we can deal with reality instead of the fake democracy we think we have.
Top issue, Mr. Sanders.
It's the economy, Mark. We have almost 15% of working people in this country are either unemployed or underemployed. We have 50 million people who have no health insurance. Median family income has gone down by some $4,000 in the last 10 years. And I'm going to work very, very hard and continue my efforts to create the millions of jobs that our country desperately needs by rebuilding our infrastructure and putting a whole lot of people to work, building the roads, rebuilding the roads and the water systems and the bridges that are in disrepair. We've got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. When you do that, you create a whole lot of jobs. We need to rethink our disastrous trade policies, which have led to the outsourcing of millions of jobs. And we've got to take on Wall Street and get them to invest in the productive economy and not in their gambling casino.
Mr. Diamondstone, top issue?
Top issue is war. No matter what the concerns are for social issues, when you vote for every military appropriation that comes up and make sure that all the money goes to the Zionist government in Palestine, and you make sure that the war continues in Afghanistan, and you make sure that the war continues in Iraq, by your votes for those appropriations, you kill any possibility of social reform and any possibility of help to the middle class. So my first thing is to talk about eliminating the military budget, which brings us right to Burlington, because that's where the military budget is showing up next. In the militarization of the state of Vermont, turning Burlington into Bagram II, and that's being led by Mr. Sanders, by Mr. Vogel, by Mr. Leahy, and they're bringing in Sandia Corporation, and they're bringing in Lockheed Martin. So the military-industrial complex is here because Mr. Sanders invited them here and made sure that they come here and pay. Sandia pays $9 million to the University of. That's a cheap sellout, $9 million to militarize the state of Vermont. We need to get out of this state, the United States. We need to separate.
Two follow-ups to this round. Mr. Moss, while Mr. Sanders is asking that question, you were amused. Why?
Mr. Sanders always talks in generalities and never in specifics. His favorite solution is, quote, "We will work real hard at that." And you will hear him say that 5 or 10 times during an hour broadcast. Why does he do that? Because he tells the voters what he thinks they want to hear. And then he asks his sponsors that finances $6 million plus campaign kitty what he has to do to earn that $6 million.
I'll give you a chance to respond in a moment. But first, can you clarify for me, Cris Ericson, were you suggesting that Mitt Romney in the debate, when he used the reference to Big Bird, that he was not talking about the Big Bird from Sesame Street? Did I understand you right on that?
What I'm saying is I think that when President Obama first raised the issue, that what he's really saying is we have to watch out for the big yellow bird, which is China.
Okay, well, Romney's actually the one that I think brought it up.
He may have brought it up second.
Okay. Mr. Sanders, can you respond to what Mr. Moss said?
Well, Mr. Moss, you want real results? In the transportation bill, we're going to bring in over $400 million into the state of Vermont to rebuild our roads and bridges, put money into rail, and create a whole lot of jobs. In the last few years, we have greatly expanded community health centers. So 120,000 Vermonters are now accessing their primary health care through community health centers, creating jobs there as well. We've expanded veterans programs in the state of Vermont, so our vets can now access primary health care all over the state. Created jobs doing that.
Let's talk about gridlock next. A couple of you have already mentioned it, and we'll start with you. What are you going to do to try to break this gridlock in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think the biggest problem, actually it's not a problem, I think, for the parties to have somebody to point fingers at for reasons they can't get something done. And so that was one of the things that I recognized immediately when I started thinking of a solution to this problem. And simply by changing the way we vote so that we write the bills first before and turn our representatives into just representatives instead of legislators, then we can break through, we can bypass the current political gridlock and vote in directly, or almost directly, I should say, the three bills that I have researched that to find that most people agree with these areas that I wrote the bills on.
Mr. MacGovern?
Well, the question is, am I in favor of gridlock?
No, the question is not whether you're in favor of gridlock. What are you going to do to try to end the gridlock there?
Well, I think, first of all, to focus on issues that unite us instead of those which divide us. That's one thing. And I think also the rhetoric of attack and divide and class warfare, which the incumbent senator frequently entertains, is not productive to bring people across the aisle to work together. So I would focus on issues of importance to the country, and I think evidence of that is that the debt is one of them. All we have to look at is the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was made up of members of both parties. Clearly, that's an issue where there's agreement that it's a serious issue and it must be addressed. Second, you must stop having people go to Washington who immediately go down there and try to get reelected and forget about the public interest but their own interest. And that's why I have said that if elected, I would serve one term.
Mr. Moss.
I couldn't agree more with Mr. MacGovern. In fact, I remind the audience that my first of 10 proposed bills is single term of office to replace professional career politicians. The gridlock is make-believe to lead the people to believe that we have two parties. We only have one party, variously called Demopublican or Republicratic. And the gridlock, quote unquote, is to cover for that sorry fact. Now, if we named the parties donkey capitalist and elephant capitalist, we suddenly wouldn't have two parties, because when the chips are down, they are all devoted to free enterprise, whether that is the right answer or not.
Mr. Sanders, gridlock.
I think the answer to the gridlock issue is that Congress is way, way out of touch with the needs of ordinary Americans, because what goes on in Washington is heavily influenced, especially since Citizens United, by Wall Street and big money interests. You have Wall Street right now, and virtually all Republicans and some Democrats, for example, saying, well, we've got to do deficit reduction, but to do it, we've got to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and education. On the other hand, what the American people are saying, ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes, do away with all these corporate loopholes and tax havens in the Cayman Islands, and take a hard look at military spending, which is much too large. So what you have is a Congress out of touch with the American people, in my view, because of the influence of big money.
Mr. Diamondstone.
You know, I don't think there's really any gridlock at all. They're getting exactly what they want, which is war. And more. And he says he's opposed to the military budget, but he votes for it. And he votes for arms for Israel, for the Zionist government in Palestine that's invading its neighbors. He votes for the war and the monies for Afghanistan and Iraq. And we need to understand Vietnam ended not because of any administrative act, but because Congress said it was going to cut off the money. Now, Mr. Sanders instead has voted for the March 31st, 2003 resolution that reads, Congress expresses the unequivocal support and appreciation of the nation to the President as Commander-in-Chief for his firm leadership and decisive action in the conduct of military operations in Iraq as part of the ongoing global war on terrorism. Mr. Sanders signed off on that. He voted for it. Most people think he's riding on his reputation as being anti-war. He's not. He's pro-war.
Ms. Ericson.
The only reason we have gridlock is because we have a national deficit. If we were in the black, if the national budget had a lot of money, then there wouldn't be any argument. It would be, okay, spend here, spend there. But the thing is, what we've got to do to get in the black is to have a flat and fair national tax, and also on Social Security. So regardless of how much money someone makes, they should pay the same percentage of their income into Social Security as a low-income person, with no cap at $250,000 or anything like that. So all persons and all corporations, since corporations are being treated like persons, all corporations and all persons should pay a flat and fair tax, the same percent. If we charged everybody 2% across the board, we'd be in the black.
As many of you know, the military is discussing the idea of putting the F-35 fighter jet here in Burlington to replace the F-16s. That's our next question. We have an email question from South Burlington. If you're elected to be U.S. Senator and F-35s get based at the Vermont Air National Guard, what will you do to protect my family and the children who attend Chamberlain Elementary School in South Burlington from the F-35's harmful health effects that will cause my home and neighborhood to be classified as unsuitable for residential use by the U.S. government? We start this round with Mr. MacGovern.
Well, I now, having looked at this matter very carefully, though I must say it was new to me since I'm from Windsor, Vermont, the issue of the F-35s was not one that we were all familiar with. So I went around the neighborhood, I spoke to people on both sides of the question, and decided that, in my view, it's in the best interests of the community and the state that not to support the F-35 coming into Burlington. Right now you have the F-16 flying, and as I understand it, they will continue to fly for another 10 or more years, and that will give the Guard, which I support very strongly, the time to transition into other missions. I believe that this is a deeply flawed proposal, and that the Air Force will make the decision, as I understand it, and that they'll probably make the right decision, and it will not be coming to Vermont.
Mr. Moss, F-35s?
I am not opposed to the F-35 as much as I am opposed to homeporting it in Burlington. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I can tell you this. The F-35 was designed to carry targetable nuclear weapons. Therefore, it has on board at least two masses, which, when combined, radioactive material, create and sustain a chain reaction, a thermonuclear chain reaction. And the result, you have a choice, is either Fukushima in Burlington or Hiroshima in Burlington. This is something that has not been brought up yet. Therefore, I say, put it to Kazakhstan, which is between Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, and Iraq. That's where it belongs.
Mr. Sanders.
Just a few points. It is absolutely true that there are many people who are opposed to the F-35 being in Burlington. My understanding is that today, just today, some 10,000 people released the petition with 10,000 names on it in support of the F-35. Two basic issues. If the F-35 does not come to Burlington, does the F-35 disappear? Of course it does not. The F-35 is the fighter jet of the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and in fact NATO. If Vermont does not get the F-35 and the F-16 is phased out, I worry about the future of the Air Guard here in Burlington and the hundreds of jobs associated with it. South Carolina or Florida will get the F-32. Third point, noise is a very, very legitimate issue. And what I pledge along with the rest of the delegation is to work as closely as we can with the Vermont National Guard, who are good neighbors, and with the communities involved to make sure that we do everything that we can to mitigate noise and other environmental concerns.
Mr. Diamondstone, the F-35s.
Yeah, that brings me back to question number one. I wanted to tell you about the shirt that I'm wearing that was designed by my granddaughter Emily in remembrance of a young man named Sean, who was a very close friend of our family and committed suicide. And why that comes to mind now is it seems to me that basing the F-35s in Burlington is a form of suicide, turning Vermont into Bagram 2. And it is the straw that broke my back in terms of secession. We have to leave the Union and join with other states in a union that's different. Perhaps the 3 northern states of New England. I don't know. But we cannot stay in this union. And every time I read that sentence from the resolution that Mr. Sanders voted for in March of 2003, he just says he's opposed to the war, but he never denies that he voted to unequivocally thank the president for the war effort in Iraq.
Ms. Ericson?
The F-35s are designed to carry targeted, smart nuclear bombs. The issue isn't 6 minutes of noise a day. The issue is nuclear proliferation. Now, when I was a child, in the early 1960s, Vermont was the Garden of Eden. Since Bernie Sanders came in, Vermont's gone to hell. And we've got to stop this hell that he's putting us through. We've got to stop the F-35. We've got to stop nuclear proliferation. Sure, they can have it down in South Carolina, but we can at least just say no to it here in Vermont. Now, there are other serious problems with the F-35. We have a problem with solar flares. NASA says the solar flares are going to continue for another year. They disrupt communication, and because solar flares disrupt communication, we can end up with one of these nuclear bombs detonating in Burlington, Vermont.
As a VoteKISS candidate, I represent 3 pre-written bills instead of empty promises or personal opinions. The first bill, which is a constitutional amendment, and its first section says that the U.S. and state constitution shall be interpreted as originally intended and amended. And since that hasn't happened in quite a while, we've had 5 wars fought without Congress ever declaring war. And so if this bill gets passed, the whole military machine would be called into question by we the people, who would be able to say, this is what I want to get done or not get done. And I think that protection by the U.S. Constitution is our biggest chance of being able to decide for ourselves rather than through a secondary agent what we want to have done, how we want to be governed in this country.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live debate here on Vermont Public Television. We are broadcasting live from our studios here in Colchester. A couple of follow-ups on this issue. Senator Sanders, if Vermont were not in the running for this proposal, and you had to vote up or down on the F-35, which has been the subject of some pretty significant overruns, would you vote in favor of it?
You're right. The F-35 has had both mechanical and cost overruns, but the issue is, Mark, right now, that decision has already been made. If you speak to the Department of Defense, the F-35 is the plane, as I said earlier, of the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy. Not only that, it is the plane of record now for NATO. And the simple reality is that if the F-16 is phased out, And if the F-35 comes about to an Air Guard base, if Vermont doesn't get it, we will lose many, many hundreds of jobs. I worry about the future of the Vermont National Guard and of the men and women who are serving in the Guard and the educational opportunities that go with that service and the impact on our economy for the Vermont National Guard. Those planes will simply go to South Carolina or Florida, who very much want them.
But would you feel as strongly about this as a weapon system if Vermont were not in the running?
If you're asking me the broader question, we are now spending 3 times on the military what we spent since 1997. If the question is, do we cut military spending? We do. But you got a plane. This is the plane, Mark. You may like it, I may like it or not like it. That is the reality. If it doesn't come to Vermont, it will go to South Carolina, it will go to Florida. Those states want it. They see it good for their economy.
So you would support the F-35 if Vermont were not in the running to get it?
If you started way many, many years ago, before I was in the Senate, when they started talking about the F-35, that is a different discussion.
Okay, what if that vote were today? Would you support the F-35 today if Vermont were not in the running?
Again, it is here. It's what a question of supporting it or not. The F-35 is being produced. It is the plane of NATO. It is the plane of the United States Air Force. So that's a kind of a hypothetical question.
Okay, it is a hypothetical question. Mr. MacGovern, there are some people that feel that your opposition to this proposal is simply because Senator Sanders supports it and that it's political expediency. True?
Exactly the reverse of that. This is an issue which, sadly, most politicians don't make decisions based on the facts. Just the facts. And let the chips fall where they may. And that's the way I made this decision. I looked at the facts. And one of the facts is expressing concern about national defense. One of the big problems with national defense is politicians using defense budgets to help them get reelected as pork projects, not looking at the merits, but looking at it as a generate pork. That is a big problem. The Congress established a BRAC, Base Realignment Closure Commission, because they recognized they were incapable of making decisions based on national defense. So I made a decision based on the facts. The Air Force, in its quote, said it's inappropriate to a residential area. I'm greatly concerned about the residential area, and I think it's not in the interest of the Guard to be going forward with a project, a mission, that alienates any large portion of the community. I think it's a mistake.
Laurel LaFramboise, what would you say to people about if somebody worked there, the jobs issue on this?
Well, again, my personal opinion doesn't matter because I represent bills rather than baloney. So basically what I would say is that your best way of solving this problem is by being able to vote almost directly for bills so that you will know that those kinds of buying of votes through using, the incumbents buying votes through using public funds, especially through the military, will not happen if you vote almost directly for bills yourself.
Mr. Diamondstone, what would you say to people about that, to somebody who worked at the Air National Guard at the prospect of them losing their job?
That's the repetition of the pork question that was raised earlier. Sanders is in favor of it because it's going to save jobs. Well, I wonder if he's in favor of the nuclear power plant down in my neighborhood because it's going to save jobs. I've been opposed to it since before it was built. And now here we are again, and we're talking about saving jobs and endangering the people. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care. That's the point. That's why we have to leave this union, because the people who represent us don't care. And he comes in here and talks about cutting the military budget, and he gives money every year to the Zionist government to go and spread its war all over the Middle East. Thank you. He gives, he joins in every military appropriation. How can he stand there and say that he's really interested in jobs, except that he's interested in the pork? that those jobs would bring.
Cris
As far as
Ericson,
I'm concerned,
thank you.
those people can find other work here, and that's up to the state government to find those jobs and the federal government to provide unemployment insurance
Cris
and
Ericson,
retraining.
thank you. Cris Ericson, how would you address this jobs question?
Okay, if you create jobs that cause health hazards, then you are costing the taxpayers more money in the long run. So if you create jobs in the military that, for example, with the F-35s, even if a nuclear bomb doesn't detonate in Burlington, you've got the 6 minutes of noise a day, you've got your houses shaking and rattling, you've got people's nerves rattling. These become long-term chronic health problems, and I know what kind of long-term chronic health problems the military caused because I lived on West Bolton Mountain, and they were detonating M155s, and the house shook and the ground shook, and blood would come out of my eyes and nose and mouth. I know what kind of health problems the military can cause, and they shouldn't be in a residential neighborhood, causing the residential neighborhood to be uninhabitable.
Mr. Sanders, we've had a couple of the candidates here, Mr. Moss and Ms. Ericson, raising this question of sort of a nuclear issue involved with this plane, and that being a threat here in Burlington.
No.
True?
No, it's not true. Here is the simple issue. The simple issue is, you like the F-35, you don't like the F-35, that's fine. The F-35 is here. It will be the advanced jet fighter for the United States Air Force. If the F-35 does not come to Vermont and we lose our mission, the Vermont National Guard Air Force loses their mission, it will mean hundreds of jobs and the future of the Vermont Air National Guard. I don't think that is good for the state of Vermont. If we don't get it, folks in Florida are delighted to get it. Folks in South Carolina want it. I'd rather have those jobs right here in the state of Vermont.
I want to stick on a foreign policy issue, and we'll start with Mr. Moss. There's a civil war in Syria. Should the United States be doing more to help the opposition to the Syrian government?
No. I am the peace and prosperity candidate. And peace is peace on earth, not just in the lower 50 or 48. And I am opposed to war because it creates more problems than it solves. And things can be settled peacefully. As one example, going back to the nuclear menace that the F-35 represents, if I am elected, I would create a new federal department by merging two existing ones. Namely, it would be called the Department of Social and National Security, with social being the senior partner, and when that's fully funded, the rest goes to the national security. I'm not afraid of Quebec attacking us.
Mr. Sanders, Syria.
Well, I think as most Vermonters know, despite what you may have heard here this evening, I not only voted against the war in Iraq, but helped lead the effort against that, voted against the Gulf War. And after two wars, which have cost us over 6,000 soldiers, will end up costing us over $3 trillion added to our national debt. No, I do not think that we should be involved in the war in Syria. Assad is a vicious dictator. He has killed tens of thousands of his own people. I think it's appropriately that we arm the rebels, but do it in a very careful way, because you don't want blowback. You don't want to be giving heavy-duty arms to people who end up using it against us in the years to come, as occurred in Afghanistan after the Soviet Union left. So, no, I do not think we should be on the ground in Syria.
Mr. Diamondstone.
One of the things that Mr. Sanders said is he opposed the war, and I need to read these words again that I've read over and over again that he voted for, and I carry the roll call with me. Congress expresses the unequivocal support and appreciation of the nation to the President and Commander-in-Chief, that was Bush, for his firm leadership and decisive action in the conduct of military operations in Iraq as part of the ongoing war on global war and global war on terrorism. He voted for it. No,
If I can.
You'll have an opportunity in a moment.
and I have the roll call with me. He has voted for every appropriation for war in Afghanistan, every appropriation for war in Iraq, and then says he's opposed to it? That's nonsense. We have a situation where the war budget is destroying the very things he says he aims to correct. It's guns or butter, and he won't vote against the guns.
Cris Ericson?
I believe Bernie Sanders lied about the F-35s because the F-35s are designed to carry targeted nuclear bombs. So if what I understood Bernie Sanders to say they're not, he lied and he committed fraud affecting the outcome of a federal election. The F-35s are designed to carry targeted, smart nuclear bombs. Now, Russia is an ally of Syria's Assad dictatorship. Russia is an arms supplier and they're a trading partner with India. The Russians' answer to the F-35 is the T-50, and the Russians are selling the T-50 to India. Russia doesn't want to renew the 1992 CTR, the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, which is an American finance program. They don't trust America anymore, and they say America shouldn't be telling other people, other countries, what their moral values should be when newspaper stories prove that we're lacking moral values here in the United States. So we have a real big problem going on worldwide, and we just have to completely stop and get into peace negotiations and talk about who's trading partners with who.
Laurel LaFramboise?
Well, the VoteKISS bills the three bills are government reform, healthcare reform, and tax reform. None of those directly affect foreign policy, because I believe that we need to clean house and tend to our own problems before we stick our nose into other people's problems. And the only thing that directly affects the war in Syria is that you would have to obey the Constitution as originally intended and amended, and require Congress to declare war on any country where we commit troops.
Well, getting back to the issue of jobs and the F-35, and Senator Sanders talking about it as a jobs program.
Question Syria.
Right.
Okay.
The jobs program. On the one hand, he has been rated very low by the business groups. In the United States National Federation of Independent Business. So on the one hand, he votes for bills that hurt business, and on the other hand, uses the defense budget for pork. That I find troubling. Now, getting back to Syria, I agree with those who said the United States should not get involved in wars without a declaration of war. We should go to war with great care and realizing the costs in human blood and sacrifice. But when we go to war, we should go into war to win. The issue in Syria is a tricky one. We had the problem in Libya, where you overthrow a dictator and al-Qaeda takes over. So we have to be proactive there. I don't say we should be separate there, but we should not be certainly putting American troops there. But being involved in it is probably wise, since it is in a very difficult part of the world.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders, Mr. Diamondstone says that you praise the president and his conduct in the war in Iraq. Is that true?
If Mr. Diamondstone has a full copy of that resolution,
I do.
Then read the section where we thank the men and women of the armed forces who put their lives on the line in that war. It is one thing.
Shall I read
to
all
vote,
the whereases too?
It is one thing to vote against the war, as I did, to lead the opposition to the war, as I did. But when a resolution comes which says, among many other things, that we give thanks, or whatever the wording is, to the men and women who served in the military, this state has lost a number of young people who served. So I thought it was appropriate to say, yeah, we thank you, even though I opposed the war.
Okay, brief response,
That's
please.
interesting. There are three parts, and the second and third do address the members of the armed services and their families. But all the whereases, every single one of them is right out of, what's his name, Bush's catalog. Al-Qaeda. Iraq is a threat to the security of the United States. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. All those, what I'm tempted to use pleasant language. Leave that be. He voted for all of that. And now his excuse is he's supporting the troops. That's malarkey. He's supporting the troops by sending them to war. Right? That's the only thing, the only way he can support them. Did he vote? Though 42 members of the House, or 32 members of the House did not vote for this. He didn't have the cojones to vote against it.
Laurel,
Mark, let me just reiterate.
In a
All
moment.
Right, be clear. I voted against the war, led the opposition to the war. There were not 32 people who voted against it.
Hold on, excuse me. Laurel LaFramboise, you discussed not supporting efforts in Syria. What about Libya? Would you have not supported that?
I would not support anything that my constituents haven't directly shown me that the majority of them would vote for something like this, because I believe that my job is not to legislate. My job is to represent the people. And one of the things that I think that this whole thing brings up is the fact that our legislators now can look at a 2,500-page bill and say, oh, well, I voted for this part because I agreed with this part, but there was a bunch of other stuff in there that I didn't agree with, but because I agreed with this part, I'm going to sign it. And this is the same excuse that Bernie's using right now with this resolution. There was a part in there that he liked. He voted for it because of that. And yet he can get away with doing that by simply because these bills are way too long, way too complex, and politicians use that as a tool.
Mr. MacGovern, did you support the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan?
I wasn't in Congress. I wasn't in the Senate at the time.
You were here living in this country. Did you support them or not?
Do I support, once we go to war, of course I support victory in war.
The decision to go into Iraq, did you think that was a good idea or a bad idea?
I don't have all the facts that were available to those. Turns out some of those facts were not facts that led them to decide to go into Iraq and Afghanistan. I think the Afghanistan situation, in my mind, is much clearer and more reasonable. However, I strongly oppose going to war to bring democracy to other countries. You go to war because there are enemies, they are a threat, and you destroy them. And I think it was mad, absolute madness, to think that we can bring democracy, the end of a bayonet, to other countries. I think, and secondly, as I said before, the main issue for me is the debt, the deficit, and getting the economy going. And you don't do that by getting distracted and going around the world. I feel the same way about Libya. I don't like Gaddafi, but let's not get involved in foreign wars at this time.
Thank you.
Focus on this country.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders, did you support the appropriations for the war in Afghanistan?
I supported some military appropriations and I opposed some, and some authorizations and I opposed some. But bottom line is,
hold on.
Bottom line is, I think the record is very clear. So let's not have any misunderstanding. The senator not only voted against the war in Iraq, but helped lead the effort against that, voted against the Gulf War. And sometimes, and Laurel made that point, it is true, there are big bills out there, and there are things you like and things you don't like in it. And there was language in that particular provision that I didn't like. But I thought it would be wrong, especially given Vermont's, the kind of suffering that Vermont saw in the war, not to say, yeah, we recognize the service and thank the soldiers for serving, even though it was a war that I did not agree with.
Mr. Moss, I'm going to give you the final comment on this question.
Thank you very much. Plank 5 of my 10-plank legislative plan reads initiative, referendum, and recall for direct democracy and real voter control. That means I would change the War Powers Act to require a national referendum of every voter and a majority or supermajority before any war is commenced or entered into by these United States. Amen.
Our next question will deal with LIHEAP funding. This is the Low Income Heating Assistance Project. I'm sorry?
Oh, I didn't hear what you said.
Okay. We're going to talk about the LIHEAP program. We have an email question from Kathy in Essex Junction who asks, is it appropriate to cut LIHEAP funding at a time when the current economic crisis has created additional need? We begin this LIHEAP, the Low Income Heating Assistance Program.
Thank you.
Is it appropriate to cut that funding right now? Mr. Sanders, we start with you.
The answer is absolutely not. We have tens of thousands of seniors and families with kids, low-income families with kids, who depend upon LIHEAP not to go cold in the winter. 3 or 4 years ago, I led the effort to double funding for LIHEAP from $2.5 billion to $5 billion. In the last several years, led by Republicans, that appropriation has been cut and cut. But what we're looking at right now, Mark, is not only terrible cuts in LIHEAP, but if the Republican Ryan budget gets implemented, you're going to see cuts in Medicare, you're going to see devastating cuts in Medicaid, and cuts in nutrition programs. But to answer your question, I am one of the leaders in the United States Senate and in Congress in defending LIHEAP and making sure that nobody in this state or country goes cold in the winter.
Mr. Diamondstone.
You can't have guns and butter. And he keeps on voting for putting more money for war. You can't have both. And so he becomes a contradiction. Right? He is a gigantic lie. He says he's in favor of all these programs and other people keep knocking it down, and he's the person who's principally responsible because he's voting for all the military appropriations. He's voting for $3 billion more to the Zionist government in Palestine so they can carry on war against their neighbors, even if he says he's in favor of cutting the military budget, but he votes for it every single time. You know? And I wanted to show you 43 members did not vote for that piece of legislation that Mr. Sanders voted for. Here's the roll call, and anybody can look it up. House Resolution H. Con Res 104, concurrent resolution, March 21, 2003, and that's the ones who voted against it or did not vote for it in the House, including people like Ron Paul, including people like
Cris Ericson. LIHEAP funding?
The low-income heating assistance program is essential for Vermonters to keep their homes. If you can't heat your home, your pipes freeze and your home is destroyed. There's only one problem with the program. People will apply for the program, and before the end of the year, around December, they'll get a benefit amount that is paid to their fuel dealer, but it's not enough to last the whole winter. And then people will be emailing Bernie Sanders or calling his office, begging and pleading for more fuel assistance. And then later in the year, in March, they'll get a second fuel assistance allotment. So all of these Vermonters are used to begging to Bernie, oh, more fuel assistance, we can't survive the winter. And I'm wondering why can't we just get enough to last the whole winter? Like food stamp program, you get so much per month. Why isn't the fuel assistance program run like the food stamp program?
Laurel LaFramboise, LIHEAP funding?
The VoteKISS bills solve these problems at once and for all through a United States amendment. I want to read Section 8. All bills must be submitted in conversational English, pertain to one subject or issue, and be no longer than 5 pages of summary, 20 pages of executive details, and 40 pages of administrative details, stopping those things that politicians use. Section 2, all citizens have the right to, number 3, a living wage that provides an employee and one dependent with at least basic necessities, food, water, shelter, dependent care, commuting, health, disability care, and higher education if required by employer. So building it in to the U.S. Constitution that employers have to pay at least a living wage is the way to solve the problem of low heat and begging the government for favors.
Mr. MacGovern?
One of the reasons that I'm so concerned about the debt and our headlong race toward bankruptcy is there won't be money for these programs that everyone is depending on if we continue down this road. All the government largesse, politicians coming back with bags of money on their shoulders to hand out at election time and through the winter, that's not going to be there. I'm very clearly and articulately, I believe, on the side of smaller government, more freedom, people being able to keep more of their money, leave more money with those who create jobs, more prosperity, less need for lie heap, therefore. That model is the way to go, and get out of debt. And so the people on the other side are for larger government, but it doesn't matter what side of the equation you're on. The way we're going now, there won't be money for these programs if we continue on it.
Mr. Moss?
We live in a system created by the 1% rich for the benefit of the 1% of the 1%. And I would change that with several of the items of the Moss sawback, which is here and which we don't have time to review in detail. Only one thing I will mention. I will create, as I said before, a United States Department of Social and National Security. And the social part includes lie heap and every other thing that underpaid or under need to survive. The war expenditures or defense against Quebec, I don't want to finance.
Just so I'm clear, Mr. MacGovern, your concern with the national debt and the budget deficits year to year, you would allow the lie heap cuts to go through?
I didn't say that.
I'm trying to get clarity on that.
I'm making a larger point. You're fighting over, this is a sideshow of the war. The main war going on today, the main issue, is we're heading to bankruptcy. And people who are voting for these massive deficits, put us in this situation, are going to be cutting off these programs. And they are not survivable. This country is not going to be able to continue on this path, and we will not be able to do the good things that we're doing.
So this is one of the programs that you would cut to get to that point?
No. You can say what you want, but please don't put
I'm
words.
trying to get clarity from you on this.
Well, I ask you, don't put words in my mouth.
I'm not.
I didn't say I wanted to cut lie heap. The reforms of the federal budget would take place over time, but ultimately I want a society in which lie heap is almost unnecessary. That is my goal. And to say you're for lie heap and then vote for massive debts is an inconsistent position. And that's my point.
If I can, I don't want to put words into John's mouth. But John, I think you did say, if I remember correctly, that the Ryan budget was, quote unquote, too timid, and you would be bolder. Did you say that?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
And let's be clear. What the Ryan budget does is make devastating cuts in virtually every social program. $700 billion over a 10-year period in Medicaid. Ending Medicare as we know it right now. Major cuts in Pell Grants. Major cuts in nutrition programs. And I have no doubt that lie heap is there as well. John, as I understand it, wanted to go even further. John is right about the deficit. It is a serious problem. But there are ways to do deficit reduction and do it not on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. And that's by asking the wealthiest people and largest corporations to start paying their fair share of taxes.
Well, so can I respond?
You may.
I was talking about the Ryan budget gets us to solve the debt problem. Over a period of 10 years, I thought 10 years was too long, basically. That was not an endorsement of every single item in the budget, but the direction it's going in. And whether or not I would support cut and lie heap, if I supported that budget, I don't know. I have to look at the budget and see what cuts are necessary. But the most important point to remember is this. Part of the Ryan budget is reform of the tax code to get the economy going again, flatten the tax rates, lower the rates, broaden the base, do away with the $1 trillion of loopholes and credits and where major corporations sometimes take advantage, get the economy going, get revenues back up, get people back to work. You have less need for these, hopefully, less need for these programs. So it's the way to save this country, to save our freedom, and to save these programs, and to do it in a responsible way.
I will get to you in a moment. I'm not putting your words in your mouth. I want to understand, in the short term, over the next year or two, would you cut LIHEAP funding or not?
If I were in the Senate today, and I would spend as much money as I could get without breaking the back of the budget to bring back to pay for those who needed it in Vermont. Second point would be, the more the government gets out of the way and lets people have more of their money, don't you think, I know my church, they would take care of poor people. My community, they would take poor people. The idea that because the government isn't, that they will go without, is an absurdity.
Ms. Ericson?
Yes, my grandfather was born on a hemp farm in 1898. Marijuana and hemp used to be legal, and if we legalize it again, we can pay for LIHEAP. Legalizing and taxing marijuana and hemp won't pay for everything, but if it comes between Vermonters freezing to death in their homes, let's legalize and tax marijuana and pay for the fuel assistance with that.
If you're just tuning in, you're watching a live debate here at the studios of Vermont Public Television in Colchester. We're featuring tonight the candidates for the United States Senate. I want to move next to health care. We'll start with you, Mr.
Respond to these two.
No, we're going to move to the next topic here. I want to discuss health care and whether or not you support the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. We start with you, Mr. Diamondstone.
No, I support socialized medicine. And one of the problems is we can't get it because we're tied up in the single payer issue, which is an administrative act, and sure, we should have it, and it'll save 20-some-odd% of the bill, but we'll still end up with the rotten medical system and hospital system that we have, and Big Pharma running it, and the medical industry and hospital system running it, and there won't be any end to the Vioxx 100,000 deaths. There won't be any end to the spinal meningitis from the injection. We have a situation where the people who make the inoculations are like the nuclear power plant. They don't have to have insurance because you can't sue them. You know, you can die from the injection, but your family can't sue them, or you can get sick and you can't sue them. You got to sue the federal government. We, the taxpayers, are standing, and we're supporting that, but not LIHEAP. And what I said in the beginning was, these two guys want what they call gridlock. Gridlock works to their benefit. I'm talking.
Ms. Ericson.
Yes, after I graduated college many years ago, in 78 and 79, in the state of Massachusetts, I was a state licensed life and health insurance agent for New York Life Insurance Company. Now, I firmly believe that if we're paying taxes for something, then we shouldn't have middlemen. When we send kids to school grades K through 12, we don't buy insurance to send them to school. We just send them to school and our taxes pay for it. So if we're going to have be forced as taxpayers to pay for health care, then it should be government-run clinics and government-run hospitals, and we shouldn't have any middlemen. There should be no insurance involved. The New York Times National Edition, Tuesday, October 23rd, 2012, there's something I'm concerned about. A lot of people are being denied nursing home and therapy services. This is going before a federal judge, Christina Rice, in the Federal District Court of Vermont, and she's going to try to approve a settlement and enforce it for only 4 years. Now, a term in the U.S. Senate is 6 years, so if she's only going to enforce a settlement for 4 years, then send me to the U.S. Senate so I'll have 6 years to fix the problem. Thank you.
Laurel LaFramboise.
I agree with Cris that we shouldn't have middlemen. That's why Section 2 of the VoteKISS U.S. Constitutional Amendment says a living wage that citizens are guaranteed a right to a living wage that provides employee and one dependent with at least basic necessities, including health care with a lifetime cap. And the second bill, VoteKISS bill, repeals Obamacare and replaces it with a bill in which the that employer has to put a portion of employees' wages into a health savings account, which, if unused for minor health care, spills into a retirement savings account. The employer is expected to pay for catastrophic health care with a lifetime cap for all employees, and of say $1 million for a lifetime. And in that way, government stays out of the whole business of health care. The patient decides their budget issues and their medical issues.
Thank you. Mr. MacGovern?
I'm strongly opposed to the Affordable Care Act, which Obama calls Obamacare. I think it was a huge mistake. In the midst of a massive recession, 23 million people out of work, the economy on its knees, to make a move to take over 1/3 of the economy by a government that can't, in all due respect to it, run a two-car parade, to me was an absurdity. A 2,700-page bill that you had to vote for it before you read it. A bill in which 15,000 IRS agents are being hired, to force Americans to buy insurance, where many of the religious freedom rights of this country have been taken away, or attempts to take it away. I think it's a huge mistake. I believe Mr. Sanders believes it doesn't go far enough. I believe it went entirely in the wrong direction. The 10 million people that can't find insurance, we ought to find ways to get them insurance and get them covered, and not mess up the current system in this country.
Mr. Moss?
I am in favor of single payer, which to me only means that medicine and related needs are a birthright. And I blame the incumbency not only for not having provided this, but for all our troubles. If they had acted in good conscience instead of trying to get financing for re-election, we wouldn't have any problems. So I go back to plank 5 of the Moss Sawbuck: initiative, referendum, and recall for direct democracy and real voter control.
Mr. Sanders?
Mark, the United States is the only country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care to all of its people as a right of citizenship. I voted for the Affordable Care Act after I got assurance, and it happened, that we doubled funding for community health centers, meaning 20 million more Americans will have access to primary health care. Here in the state of Vermont, it means that we went from 2 federally qualified community health centers to 8. We now have 120,000 Vermonters accessing these centers, getting not only primary health care, but dental care, mental health counseling, and the lowest cost prescription drugs available. Long term, we need to move toward a single payer system. I hope very much that our small state will lead the nation in making health care as a right and doing it in a cost-effective way which covers all of our people.
Cris Ericson, we're going to start the next round with you. Was the government right to bail out Chrysler and the other auto companies?
No, definitely not. Can I say one more thing about health care?
No, we gotta move on here.
Okay, no, definitely not. Absolutely, definitely not. Business should be, the cream rises to the top. Struggle as you might. It's just wrong. It's just totally and completely wrong. That's what you call socialism and communism. It's taking from everyone to make a few people wealthy. It's wrong.
Section 10 of the Vermont VoteKISS U.S. Constitutional Amendment says the federal government is prohibited from creating laws or establishing organizations aimed at supporting or competing in the market for goods or services, and shall not pay states for marketable state-run goods and services. Regulatory laws governing the market shall be constrained by applicable sections of the Constitution as amended. Congress shall have 6 years from the date of ratification to adjust current laws and eliminate federal organizations and payments to state organizations that support or provide marketable goods or services.
Thank you. Mr. MacGovern.
No, I would not support government bailout of failed industries, failed businesses. I believe in, as I said many times, free markets and free minds have created more wealth, more prosperity for more people than any other system. And you have to be free to succeed, but you also have to be free to fail. An orderly bankruptcy should have occurred. Parts of those companies would have been bought up by better companies. Ford Motor Company never took a nickel and survived. And that is the way I would have proceeded on that point. The government doesn't have any money. The government is out of money. We're spending our children and our grandchildren's money. So let the free market work.
Mr. Moss.
The free market did very well. After the Second World War, when the United States was had a growing economy for various well-known reasons. That is no longer the case. And instead of allowing the 1% to rip off the 99% by stock market manipulation, I would convert corporations to co-ops, where the employees own, manage, and operate the enterprise. And there are no stockholders, and no Wall Street, and no speculation, and no manipulation, and no 1% control. Thank you.
Mark, 4 years ago, just about this time, because of the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street, this country was losing 700,000 jobs a month, and we were on the verge of not only an international financial collapse, but a world depression. Because of disastrous trade policies, it is harder and harder to buy any products made in the United States of America. To lose the automobile industry would have been a real blow for our entire economy and millions of workers, not just in Michigan and Ohio, but car dealers in the state of Vermont. So for me, this was not an abstract question. I voted for that bailout. I'm proud to see that we are once again producing automobiles in the United States of America, but we've got to go further. And we need to make fundamental changes, A, on the way Wall Street does business, so that we don't get back into this position again. And number two, we need to change our trade policies so products are once again made in the United States of America, not China.
Mr. Diamondstone, your answer on that, please.
I oppose not only those two bailouts, Chrysler and General Motors, but the other bailouts, which were far more significant. And we should have bought those companies and owned them, including the banks, AIG, and the resolutions that I offered back in 2008 was that they should become public corporations, not private corporations with a bailout, but public corporations owned by we the people. Then we could keep the jobs, and we could pay people reasonable salaries. We don't have to pay them the salaries that the AIG gets, the salaries that Stearns, I can't even think of the corporations we bailed out. Yeah, all those folks that we bailed out, we got to get rid of the Federal Reserve System first, because that's the source of the problem to start with, because every dollar that we get is worth less and less every time one is issued. So,
it is time now for our closing statements, and we have drawn straws to see who goes first, and we start tonight with Laurel LaFramboise of the VoteKISS Party.
Well, there's an old saying, it's easier said than done, and you can see tonight that there's an awful lot of talk, a lot of opinions, a lot of I do this, I do that if I get into office. But VoteKISS does something completely different. It says, let's come up with some things that most Americans agree with, not politicians, because a lot of these things in the U.S. Constitution lower their power. Let's get those common things that we want to get done and have wanted to get done since Mr. Smith went to Washington in the 30s. and let's put them into bills, and let's vote almost directly for those bills and bypass the whole political schmooze stuff. Then we'll have things like campaign spending limits. Then we'll have things like most of these people have been talking about. We want to get this done. Well, yeah, how are you going to do it with a messed up Congress? With a Congress that buys people's votes? Okay, and actually has gall to stand here and be proud of the fact that they brought all this money to Vermont when we are $16 trillion in debt. That's $15,000 a head. And then he has the gall to talk about how he loves the people on fixed incomes and gets $6.9 million in $45 a piece donations. Where guess where they come from? Not Vermont. 9% of that money came from Vermont. It came from people on fixed income all over the country. Now, what he's going to do with $6.9 million when he's a shoo-in to win is beyond me. But this is the kind of thing that this VoteKISS U.S. Constitutional Amendment attacks and solves in words you can read by going to www.votekiss.org. Read the bills.
Peter Diamondstone, Liberty Union candidate, your next 2 minutes.
When Mr. Sanders and the former head of the university here decided to bring in the Sandia Corporation, longtime operator in nuclear weapons since the beginning of nuclear weapons in the 1940s, under the direction, of course, of the largest weapons manufacturer in the world, Lockheed Martin, that's when I decided that I had to become a secessionist. And part of the thing that we need to do in advance of that is dissolve the National Guard so that Mr. Sanders' armies cannot anymore Shanghai Vermonters into war, because there will be no National Guard for him to Shanghai from. We need to have our own banking system so that the Federal Reserve isn't ripping us off every minute that they issue a new dollar. We need a Vermont bank. Now, that's been advocated by every Vermont state treasurer candidate since the 1980s. We need to do something about providing social services from our own endeavors. We need to tax ourselves, and we need to separate so that we don't pay taxes to the federal government. We only pay taxes to ourselves through our own state bank. There are things that we can do to become independent. For instance, we can say you can't use Vermont land and water for the growth of GMOs. Now, we can't prohibit the sale of them in the state because we're still bound by the Commerce Clause. But we can prohibit our land and water from being used for that purpose, and we must go ahead and do that. We can prevent the Vioxx problems. We don't have to have 100,000 people die because the FDA screwed up. We can have our own FDA, and what we must do is have an independent investigation of the 3 buildings that came down in Manhattan, because it is impossible for 3 buildings to come down in their own footprint at free fall speed unless there's controlled demolition. We have to carry on that investigation in Vermont.
Thank you. Republican John MacGovern, you're next.
Well, thank you very much for hosting this debate, and I want to thank all the candidates here. I'm running because I believe this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. This country is clearly on the wrong track. It's on the wrong track because of the people who we sent to Washington. Washington has become dysfunctional. 93% of the American people do not support what's going on in Washington. They have a 7% approval rating. It is an axiomatic that it is not working. And so I'm trying to be a different kind of representative. Someone who goes down, tries to work across the aisle, call things the way I see them, and let the chips fall where they may. And if you're looking for someone who's going to, as I see it, one party is driving the bus 100 miles an hour toward the cliff, and the other party is driving it 60 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour. For me, I'm going down there to stop the bus and turn it around. I want to be very clear. That's why I'm going. I'm not going to be a typical politician. I will vote not support the F-35 if I think it's the wrong decision, even though I'm for a strong defense. I will do what I think is right for the people of Vermont. I believe that the free markets and free minds, people having more of their own money to create wealth, to encourage the entrepreneurs, not to make war on the entrepreneurs, is the best way to get this country moving again. And I ask the people of Vermont to consider voting for me. If you want change, if you want things to go the same way, vote for the incumbent.
Cris Ericson of the United States Marijuana Party.
Thank you. I know for a fact from years of litigation experience that one of the reasons there's such a disparity between the rich and the poor is there's a disparity in bankruptcy laws. If you're a person and you have financial problems, you file for bankruptcy under one set of bankruptcy laws. But if you're a mega corporation, you get to file under Chapter 11, you get to expunge all your debts, you don't pay what you owe, and then you go back into business again with a clean slate. This causes a vast disparity between people, and it's got to stop. We've got to have the same bankruptcy laws for people as for corporations. I need you to send me to Washington, D.C. You need to send me to Washington, D.C. because we need to declare Lake Champlain a federally protected water reservoir. 200,000 Vermonters draw their drinking water from Lake Champlain, and we're under a big threat right now. Gas Metro and another company in Vermont are planning on putting a natural gas pipeline under Lake Champlain. To build a natural gas pipeline would stir up all the water of Lake Champlain and make it non-drinkable. Remember, 1/3 of Vermonters draw their drinking water from Lake Champlain. Now, all gas pipelines leak sometimes, so it would leak gas and lead into the lake. This would be a disaster. We've got to get Lake Champlain declared a federally protected water reservoir. We've got to get federal funding for a public works project, because right now, on the Vermont, the New York, and the Canadian side, treated sewage is being dumped into Lake Champlain. And I think that was happening when Bernie Sanders was mayor of Burlington, dumping treated sewage into Lake Champlain, while simultaneously people are drinking that water.
Thank you. Mr. Sanders, your next independent, Bernie Sanders.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult in the time that we have to answer all of the accusations thrown at me, but let me just say this. I do want to thank the people of the state of Vermont for allowing me to represent them in Washington, in the House, and in the Senate, and making me the longest-serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. I am deeply concerned that the Republican Party has become an extreme right-wing party, that the Democratic Party has forgotten its roots and is not as strongly as it should be representing working families or the middle class. And my job, as I see it in Washington, is to stand up and take on Wall Street and corporate America and fight for those people who in many ways do not have a voice in Washington. I am proud of the accomplishments that my office has secured over the last 6 years, that we've expanded primary health care and dental care for folks throughout the state, that we've stood up for our veterans and developed 2 new primary health care facilities, one in Brattleboro, one in Newport, provided a women's health clinic at White River Junction, making progress on that. We haven't talked much, Mark, about global warming, but we have got to address the planetary crisis of global warming. We have to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And I'm proud that in the state of Vermont, we've brought millions and millions of dollars into the state, creating jobs, making that transformation. I'm proud that working with Senator Leahy and Congressman Welch and the governor, we have brought from Washington over $400 million to help this state rebuild from Hurricane Irene. I'm proud that within the next 2 years, this state is going to lead the nation because of federal support in terms of high-quality broadband coming to every community in the state of Vermont, and that includes improved cell phone service as well. We're making progress. Clearly, a lot more has to be done, and I would very much appreciate the opportunity to continue my work in the Senate.
Peter Moss of the Peace and Prosperity Party, you're the final candidate to speak tonight.
Thank you. I will not have time to go over the 10 bills which I will introduce if you will elect me on November 6th. However, this book contains all of my ideas, and it is on my website, whose address is petermoss.org. Now, I think the few planks in the Moss Sawbuck that I already mentioned, the most important one is single term of office and out. That would take money out of politics, because if anybody gave any candidate re-election money when re-election is impossible, would offend criminal violations both in the state and federal books. And so single term of office is my most important issue. And again, I will appreciate your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
I want to thank our candidates for joining us tonight. We appreciate it very much. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. For all of us here at VPT, I'm Mark Johnson. Have a great night.